Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have an extremely special guest, Dr. Laurie Rousseau Nepton. She is a Canadian astronomer at the Dunlap Institute for Astronomy and Astrophysics at the University of Toronto and was the first Indigenous woman in Canada to obtain a PhD in astrophysics. She is the principal investigator for SIGNALS, a large survey program aiming at observing over 50,000 resolved star-forming regions in nearby galaxies. And she began researching Innu oral traditions about astronomy after she was asked to speak about the perspective on eclipses among First Nations by a colleague. I came across her when I heard her talking at a Astrobites conversation. It's been a recent fascination of mine, astrophysics, and I was in love with all the things that she said, and I really wanted to get her perspective on this podcast. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. How are you?
Hi, God, I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing great. We were just chatting and I was like, there's so many questions I have for you, but let's just hit the record button. But we can continue talking about it because I was fascinated with what you were saying on how, you spent some of the years of your childhood on the reservation. And I think one of the things I wanted to maybe first ask, because I know for one, I haven't really, I've never spent time. I've drove through a few reservations, but I'd love to, understand more about what life is like there, which is why I'm really excited for this season. First of all, when I think about, I'll connect it to an experience close to mine. When I think about my experience in India, for example, it's really difficult to speak for India as a whole because each state and within that state, every 500 kilometers is so different culturally and religiously. And so you can't really speak for one India. And I'm assuming, and I want to ask you if it's similar when we talk about indigenous people. It seems like there must be so much differences between each one. Is there some sort of common indigenous culture?
Oh, there's so many differences. There are some links. Of course, when I tell people about the situation across Canada, it's so vast, There's like hundreds of communities, more than 50 up to 60 languages. Some of them are the same family. So I think there's more connections when they share similar language roots in their culture. Um, And also, it depends on how far away they are from the big centers and what kind of resources they have and what's the activity on the reserve. They are usually small. So by default, they are fairly tightly knit communities. Everybody know everyone. I think that's something that's probably shared by all reserves. Um, and that comes with similarities in a way. Um, from the communities that share similar cultures and habits. I mean, we're still living on the same land. Um, and this land changes from south to north and east to west, but there's a lot of the practices that are very similar just because of that. And also we share the same sky. As an astronomer, I know that very much. So I know that there are a lot of similarities in the belief system and the teachings that are transmitted through observations of the sky.
When you said small sizes, approximately what would that look like?
Yeah, a few kilometers square. In a lot of
Hmm.
cases, some are bigger than that, but it's usually fairly small. And in some cases, uh, you even have to be on a wait list to get a spot to build your house in some of them. And so it gives you
Hmm.
an idea. But no, not all of them are like that. Yeah, some are much larger. I don't have exactly the
Yeah.
numbers, the smallest and the biggest, but it's just an overall.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as we continue this conversation, a lot more of your history and kind of your experiences will naturally flow through, which I'm really excited to hear about. But I wanted to start with talking first about astrophysics, which I think is, for many, including me, such an abstract thing that like we don't often have to interact with or think about, which is, I think, really unfortunate. I mean, the last time I think I looked up at the stars and was like actually able to see them and felt that sense of awe has been a really long time. And So I wanted to start there with what, first of all, is astrophysics? What is it the study of?
Yeah. Yeah. Astrophysics is the study of the celestial object in the night sky. Um, you can do astronomy and astrophysics just with your naked eye and observe the motion of the planets, the moon, the sun, and figure out what's the physics behind it. That's astrophysics. Nowadays we have large telescopes that enables us to see super far and see billions of galaxies. And we study, of course, a greater chunk of the universe. We study the expansion of the universe, its history, its evolution in time from its past to its eventual future. We study the composition of planets and stars and how that have influenced our life on Earth.
Hmm.
Um, and there's so many physical phenomena that happen in space. Astronomy and astrophysics is all about studying these phenomena.
Hmm. And so, how do you think your childhood and your experiences of learning about the skies, and I know you had earlier talked about your father's influence in that. I'm really curious to hear more about that. Of how did your early experiences lead you to becoming interested and following this passion in astrophysics?
Yeah, yeah. I'm an outdoor person, so it started very early on. I think my dad really wanted to make sure he was sharing that with me and my sisters. So back when I was extremely young, probably just enough after being able to walk, he would take us hunting hares and well, trapping them. And I remember we were doing the same trail every morning in the fall for a period of time until he would have caught enough of them. He would impose himself a quota, even though there was none. And we would just like go every morning just to go on the spat and check out our traps and our snares actually. And he would teach us along the way how to find good spots to put them and also how to guess how good a night would be because usually they walk a lot in the night and so that's when you actually trap them and then you have to go really early in the morning really early in the morning to make sure not another animal will steal what you caught and so you go
Hmm.
really like just before sunrise. Otherwise, a coyote or an owl or something else will just snatch your prey. And so I was being taught on looking for every signs around and also trying to make sure that I was not making any traces, both of smell or disturbing things too much so that the animal would change their behavior. My dad would tell us to look for what temperature it is. Is it windy? Is it not windy? What's the moon cycle currently? And then in the morning, while we were driving to go there and start to do our trail, we would try to guess how many hares did you trap that night. And
Hmm.
if you factored in all of that, including the moon cycle, which is really important, you could guess if it was a good night or not. And some mornings we were lucky, we had caught them. Some other mornings we saw that they passed, but they managed to get out of the trap. And we could still count, how many were active and passing in the trails. So it was a lot of fun and it was actually a lot of science. And that's what I remember from it. Yeah.
Hmm. You know, when I think about what you're saying, I have a friend who strongly believes, whether it's true or not is separate, but he has a strong belief that his like energy levels throughout the day are like somewhat impacted by the moon cycle. And whether it's true or not, that belief of his makes him like be very conscious and aware of like where we are in the cycle, which I think connects him to something that is happening that's larger than him in a very beautiful way. And I think what I'm kind of feeling from your story is that when you start to realize the interconnectedness of everything, of the moon cycles, of how windy it is, the temperature, all these things, you start to realize you're like part of something that's so much larger, which I think can do really profound things to the self. And I think that's where the fascination of science and the world begins, when you understand that not everything is simply just appearance. It's not just as it seems. There's a lot that's happening behind everything. And so do you think that this type of experience, it brought out that sense of that awe?
Yeah, like your friend story, I would never dismiss someone's belief according to something like this because there's often a lot of science behind it. And when I hear a story also from community that some people like tend to dismiss very, very quickly, that there's no link, it's impossible. Then I try to dig in and try to find, but what if there was? What if there's something else? And the moon cycle is very tightly linked with the women's cycles. And back in the days, we used to actually know very well what was the phase of the moon because it was our phase. And we were attuned into it. And we would look into the sky to look for it,
Mm,
recognize it. And just as much as science know that when you're a group of women that really hangs a lot together, they tend to also synchronize cycles. It's the endocrine system, it's our hormones. It influences everybody around us, not only the women's, but also the men. And so if your friend find out that he's is influenced by the moon cycle, well, yes, because it's all linked and we live in this system. We're part of this. And the moon is just that clock that tells us where we're at in it. We just lost this kind of connection. And I feel like it's something so valuable that we should be reconnected with. And all of these stories, these connections that people feel are actually like most of the time tightly linked with real sciences. And yeah, I think it's important to remember that.
mm. Something I'm thinking about is I'm trying to understand why that may have happened because I think there's two possibilities. One possibility is that we simply just don't spend enough time in nature. But another a reason that and first of all, you'd have to define what nature is, because I think even that is a really beautiful kind of concept of what is nature. Because we think trees and mountains, but technically a city is also some form of nature. It's not nature.
Yeah, you
But
get your distraction, your phone, something
yeah,
else is with you.
but but I guess like what I was thinking is even if we were to spend time in nature, it's possible that you still don't feel the interconnected nature of everything because it takes some form of feeling connected. Because philosophically, if you're of the mindset that nature is outside, I am an individual walking through nature. Nature is not me. It's not a part of me, which I think is like a very it follows a certain line of philosophy where you kind of view the outside world as something separate from yourself, and you are just a person who passes through it. But I think there's an opposite side, which is feeling like everything is interconnected, which I think also follows another form of philosophy. So it's not, I don't think so it's hard to identify whether if simply just spending time in nature is enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's why we usually get guidance from our family when we start learning, to go hunting. Because, you know, when we spend time in the nature, and especially with, the goal of being part of it, being part of the system, we have a specific role that we have to fulfill. And when we're hunting, we know very well what that role is. And it takes a lot of time to experience everything that can possibly happen out there. And you develop your sense of observation.
Mm,
You develop like this kind of sense of understanding the complexity of all the different factors that can affect animal behavior, your own, and all of that. And it also teach you things that are kind of, I want to say, it's like something you have by nature. I've always told people like the one of the first year I went hunting the moose, so the big hunt. I first had to learn to find myself, at ease in the trails, make sure I was not going to get lost because the land is so vast and there's nobody out there. And then once I was comfortable enough, and my dad sent me alone on a trail one morning, I remember on that morning I saw a moose, but I didn't cut it. It surprised me. But at the same time, I kind of knew it was there. And I'm saying that because I was walking very carefully, trying to apply everything that I'd learned. And then I arrived at a spot where I was hearing birds singing in a strange way, and my heartbeat started to bounce. And I thought to myself, okay, Laurie, like you're just nervous. And I decided to continue my path. And then eventually I stopped and I looked at my clock and I was late for my meeting with my dad. And so I started walking back to meet him. And at that very place where I had this feeling, the moose was actually laying down there and he stood up. He started running. And I thought, oh, that's so stupid. Like I should have listened to myself. My buddy knew there was a moose there. I just didn't listen to it. And
Hmm.
this is the kind of things that you learn only by experience. And it makes you feel that you're part of this just because your body is somehow encrypted to know things and to analyze all of these parameters and to even understand like how all of this kind of sounds like, smell like, feel like. and then it's just for me like a revelation that we're part of this. Nowadays, with our lives, with our work, with our city life style, there's no occasion for us to realize these things. And that's really unfortunate.
Hmm. I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this feeling that you're talking about here, which is as a scientist and as somebody who I feel like, I'm a person who also wants to honor what my body feels oftentimes. And so perhaps that experience you just said, where your body had this feeling that the moose would be there. Let's say, you became a researcher, you wanted to understand that feeling, and let's just say it didn't exist. It wasn't a thing that
Yeah.
somehow they were able to find. Does it matter when if I have the surest belief that my
Yeah.
gut, does it matter? What are your thoughts
I
on that?
don't know. Like, that's a good question. I would be like, as a curious mind, I would be very curious to know if there's a science behind this. Does my brain, like, does my nose smell things that, I don't necessarily notice from their smell, but that my brain analyze? Uh, is my hearing capable of hearing like the very distress call from a bird that is different than a normal one that means something
Hmm.
big there, and that I know by definition what it is without even being trained to do that, maybe. Like I kind of want to say that's all possible, and I wouldn't know how to start because I'm not a biologist to test those things, but I like to think that there is, um, because science is just a way to kind of to calculate when a very complex system that contains all of these variables interact with each other. Um, and I don't think there's anything like necessarily spiritual with it. I think that we're really part of this. We're part of this equation, this beautiful equation that is part of nature. And it's for all that I know for now, it are all cycles that are kind of intertwined with each other and that live in balance with the environment. And I think it's beautiful.
Hmm. 100%. I keep coming back to, I think some of when I look back at my life to some of the times that I've been the most content or just satisfied with what's going on. There was a time right before I graduated, I lived uh, out of my tent in DC in these beautiful mountain ranges right next to what river is that? The Potomac. And like I remember being so lost and confused. I knew absolutely nothing about what to do. I didn't know what to do when there was a thunderstorm. I was just so disconnected from something that felt like I should know. But it was interesting because right when I got back to the city, I knew how to handle the traffic. I knew how to handle, crowded rooms, which in itself is just a very different, complex environment to have to handle. So it's not that one is simple and the other, they both are equally very difficult. And so something that I'm always trying to understand, and I'm curious to hear what you think, is that how is it that people are capable of, understanding these really complex systems, like handling a city like New York, but at the same time also understanding your own place within it. So, how do you find who you are when who you are is kind of embedded in these larger systems. You know, it's not like you can't separate the two.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so different. It's just the density of population. There's so many people. When you're in a city, your senses are all constantly like stimulated by things that you learn eventually to skim it out, to dismiss some of them and to focus on some specific ones that are also built to attract your attention even more when they are really important. If there's a danger, if there's anything like that in the city setting. If you are in the nature, you're less stimulated by these thousands of things because there's less people, but also there's this kind of like you probably live in a city, like every day is looking the same. You know what to expect every morning when you leave to go to work, and it's very repetitive. Whereas in the nature, even though you don't have all of these stimulations, it surprises you constantly because when you see something, when something happens, it's going to be unique every time. And so that's what I like about it. And I always tell people, like, when we go hunting, it's usually in the fall and I'm disconnected from everything. I don't have my phone, my computer, or anything when I go there. And we tend to split. So we're not hunting with each other. We're just hunting in our own path
Hmm.
and very far away from each other for safety, of course, a few kilometers away, which is close over there. So if I hear a gunshot, I know it's my dad or my uncle. I know from the direction. But that's it. I'm alone otherwise. And anything else that I would hear that is in my surrounding, I only have to kind of follow my intuition and imagination to know what it is. And it is extremely stimulating because you don't know what it is for sure. And you have to use your skills to perform and act as a hunter, that you're part of the system and you're
Hmm.
often also trying to engage in conversation with the nature in multiple ways to make it interact with you. And it is just a completely different setting. And of course, the thing that's going to appear in front of you is not going to be another human. It's going to be an animal. And I kind of, as an astronomer, and like I'm a big fan of sci-fi. When I first hunted with my dad, I was telling him, that must be strange for an animal to see a human being for the first time. And I could imagine myself like seeing also my first moose for the first time. It almost feels like seeing like an alien because
Hmm.
it's something that you've never been with before and that you've only heard of in stories. And then it's there, and and it's just, yeah, an extremely strange feeling just to know that suddenly you're interacting with this other
Hmm.
being that doesn't speak the same language, doesn't behave in the same way, um and you don't have that in the cities. It's just very
Hmm.
repetitive and uh not as surprising.
Inter So would you consider humans to be more predictable than animals?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I think so. Yes, I think so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's I've thought about this a lot because I was like, I have been slowly forcing myself to get over my fear of animals because,
Uh-huh.
I grew up in the suburbs. The only time you saw an animal, you killed it. You were very rarely just like coexisting with animals. But in the
Yeah.
last few years, I've put myself in environments like where, there's frogs in the bathroom, where there are just animals all the time that are just coexisting with wherever you are. And it's a different feeling because you start to realize like how interconnected all these different lives are. It's not just your life that's going on, it's the birds and the animals. But I am often very terrified of animals because I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do. But what I have learned is that the more time you spend with a particular species, it becomes a lot more predictable. You know which spiders do what, you know which ones are dangerous, which ones aren't. They're not so random anymore. But with humans, I've always found you can never tell. Like you just don't know what a human is capable of at any time. And it depends on so many different things. So long as they're like fearful of of the law or of God or whatever, then there's like certain like limitations that you're like, okay, I hope they don't break any of these, but it's just I've always been fascinated with humans because I find them so random. What is your experiences? What I'm curious why
Uh,
you feel animals are more.
I think our perspective is influenced by the media, of course, because we always see the most extreme situation, online, how people
Hmm.
that have extreme ways kind of make their path to the most views and the news as well, the most viewed content. And uh in the nature, of course, you don't have that much statistics because you don't have as many encounters. And yes, if you do spend more time, then it might become more familiar for you. But I kind of want to say for scientists or people that spend a lot of times with lots of animals in like a community kind of setting, maybe that's kind of so similar to human that they develop like pathways to understand their behaviors better. But it also means that they don't necessarily observe them in their perfect natural settings where there would be less density. Like I kind of want to say, if you spend so much time with, I'm going to take the example of moose because that's what I'm I'm more familiar with. You don't see them often, and sometimes you
Hmm.
go hunting for moose for 2 weeks and you're not going to see one. And so, how would you develop such an extensive knowledge of all of the possibilities? I think that in the Innu culture, there's like a saying, that the moose is kind of giving himself to you. They decide if you're like worthy to kill them, and that there's a part of the hunting that is out of your control. Basically, it's the
Hmm.
moose that decides that, and I think that it expresses a lot to your ability to predict the animal. Um,
Hmm.
there's a limit to your prediction
Hmm.
and a limit at which you can cohabitate with them in close proximity without changing them, without changing their behavior, because they are not
Hmm.
supposed to be with you. You're supposed to be like the alien
Hmm.
that they will see maybe once or twice in their lifetime.
Hmm.
And yeah, um, they often say, you shouldn't be feeding them or like interacting with them just for the sake of their nature. And I think that's true. They're not meant to be always with humans.
I've never thought about that. Many animals have probably never been fed, right?
Yes.
They've always had to, like, there's like the concept of somebody else like giving you food,
Yeah,
unless perhaps it's like maybe your mother. But yeah, wow, that's fascinating. We're fed all the time.
we are. Yeah, we are. And when you have to feed yourself, you notice how complicated it can be because if you do it in the nature, of course, it impacts your ability to feed yourself. Like, the typical way of hunting in the culture and my culture was by traveling a lot from a summer camp to a winter camp, but you would never stay at the same spot for very, very long. You would always be traveling. And one of the very reasons for that is that you didn't want to deplete the resources in one
Mm,
single place.
mm,
And, and so this idea of feeding yourself, but also being able to continue to feed yourself was depending on your ability to really cross large distances. Um, and so yeah, we're not used to that anymore.
yeah, I think there's like so much I want to start because I mean, one of the hardest things I'm having, even as we're having this conversation, is trying to understand the world that you've like navigated throughout your life. And I'm really excited to spend more time. And if I'm trying this as we continue this season to spend more time on reservations or with Indigenous people to understand like what is their education like, what is life like? Because I think the types of media that I've consumed so far, to be honest, are all very outdated and are mostly through cartoon movies. I mean, whether it was, I think it was Big Brother, the amazing movie about the bear. Do you know what I'm talking about? Brother Bear, I think. I forgot. I really like that movie. That was a really beautiful movie. I don't, and like a few others, but it's just to say that like my understanding is so outdated. So I would love to maybe just get before we continue, kind of a deep dive into what your childhood was like. What was it growing up? Like what was your experience? What does it mean to you to be you said Innu, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a really good question. And my family, so I'm Innu from my dad's side of the family. My mom is from like I guess general European origin, settlers coming in Canada and I lived the first few years of my life outside of a reserve. And it's not the first thing you're being told, when you're very young that you're different. But actually, my dad didn't want me to know at first because he was afraid that I would feel different. And I was in a school where only me and my sister and maybe one other students were actually native. And we were hunting hares, trapping hares when I was really young. And I thought everybody was doing that. That was just a common thing to do. And it only took me a couple of decades to figure out that, oh, yeah, okay, we must have been the only one there doing that. Um, but you have your own perspective. You're building your perspective of the world when you're really young. And I could only understand the differences when I got older, like mostly recently. If I go back in time, unfortunately, I have a good memory. I know how my dad would teach me things. I know I would learn things at school. I know now the differences. And also, especially now that I've gotten back into the astronomy knowledge from my community and the oral story tradition, and which is a couple of years back ago, just for my own interests. That's when I could connect that knowledge to the way my dad would say things or the way my dad would teach me things. But for me, it was just, you know, something that I thought everybody was getting the same education because you can't compare as kid. And uh, and I got a lot of that ancestral knowledge, the oral stories that came more lately. I noticed a lot of things that my dad was doing, and I don't think he knew that it was coming from our community specifically. I think he was just doing it again because that's the way he was taught things. And and yeah, so that line is hard to draw if you've not seen both sides. And now that I've seen both, I think I can tell at least that um it's different because it's something that you learn by experience, by observation.
Mm,
You're being told to do it yourself, to try to look. You're being told to look a lot
mm,
and to figure it out by yourself. Like there's a lot of that. And to ask questions, to wonder, like, and so there's a lot of science actually into that way of thinking. I always say that I'm an astronomer because of the time that I spent in the woods learning to be a good observer there. And it fed my curiosity, it fed so many things. And nowadays I'm building tools to observe the night sky. I'm also doing a large survey that looks at star forming regions and the nearby universe. And I can tell you that it is extremely connected to the way my dad would tell me to see the world. You look at
mm,
something, you try to understand all of the different parameters that affects it, and then you try to predict it. And it's exactly the same. So yeah.
mm. There was something really powerful you said there when you were told to look. And I was thinking in my head, that sounds like what someone's asking you to do is learn for yourself. And you said that right after, and I was like, that's so different from somebody telling you to listen to me, look at me, like let me tell you what is right or wrong, rather than asking you to observe the world yourself. And I
Yeah.
think that as I've been learning more and more of oppressive education systems, I'm like, that's the difference. The channel, the flow of knowledge has to be done through a specific individual, which is terrible, rather than learn for what you see in the world, connect to what you see, your experiences, because your experiences are not my experiences. I can't tell you what is right or wrong in so many different ways. And so that was like really powerful to kind of hear that analogy of like, being asked to look and
Yeah.
observe.
And it protects you from being fed information from someone else that is incorrect too. Especially it's more information, it's more important nowadays with all the fake news. But I remember when I was a little older, in preparation for the university, we had those philosophy class and things like that. And I was one of the first students to kind of want to say fight the kind of information that was fed to us, and to at least like try to understand why people would think that way. Or, and I don't know if that's the same for everybody, but in my philosophy class there were many readings, and we had to kind of understand different kinds of philosophy and agree or disagree with them. And in my classroom, we were talking about some of the philosophies that were more like peaceful and harmony with the nature, and that's what I was kind of more aligned with. And other philosophies are more like associated with the power and the buildup of
Mm,
power by controlling the population and telling them different things to control them. And it was kind of stereotypical, but I was against that. And I would fight against it. And I remember that in our very final weeks of the semester, my teacher was saying that our class is only class that would tend towards like the nature equilibrium versus all of the other classes.
mm,
They kind of convince each other that the power and um, the control of the population was the best way to go. And when you're saying that, I think about the looking, about building your own ideas by your own experience. I think it translated in my life in many, many ways. And it protected me from being fed information that I was not agreeing with.
mm. I want to connect this point to something you said earlier before we actually started recording the last time we spoke, where we were talking about some of the barriers for, I wanted to talk about this, about how, you were the first, Indigenous woman to get her PhD in astrophysics, which is a phenomenal feat. And we were kind of talking about how, what are some of the challenges that prevent a lot of Indigenous people from having access to higher education, for example. And I wanted to
Yeah,
connect it to what we're talking about now, which is this form of observation is so powerful, but the downside of it is that you don't get a certification. You don't get to put it on your resume that you sat and observed the moon for 3 weeks or for a year or
yeah,
10 years. That's not something you get to, because what it doesn't show is that you're really good at thinking in a boxed way, that someone can say, you are this type of person, you think the way I want you to think, and therefore you're going to make an excellent employee. You've kind of
yeah,
broken out of that and have said, hey, I'm able to make my own observations. I'm able to do my own thinking, which often doesn't seem translatable to doing really well economically a lot of times. And
yeah,
so what is it? Why is that? So why is it that these particular skills are just not being valued? Why is it that your ability to sit and watch a river for hours on end is
yeah,
not a quote unquote valuable skill?
yeah. And on top of which I didn't really mention, but you're also working in collaboration with your family member that have other pairs of eyes that are looking at the other section of the land in different ways, and they tell you their stories. And you kind of use all of that information, and
Mm,
then and I think that those are extremely valuable skills that many people do not develop as well when they have a diploma. And we don't just yeah, we just need that piece of paper. Isn't that weird? Like
yeah.
it's just like when I got my PhD, and I waited for that piece of paper. It changed everything for my career, for everything. But was I a different person? Not really. Always been Laurie. It's just now I have a PhD. And one of a journalist actually was the one that pointed out to me that is there another Indigenous astronomer, an Indigenous woman in Canada? And it's a very small community of astronomers as well. And I knew there was none. And I realized at that point, because someone asked me the question, that I was the first one. And it was actually a frightening thought because it was in 2017. How could there be just one woman astronomer from the First Nation in Canada in 2017? And I guess I was again in my bubble the whole time, not necessarily realizing what was going on around me while I was studying. And I took the full extent of it and understood the full extent of it once I got my piece of paper. And I think that a lot of the problems that prevent more Indigenous people to make their way is, like you were saying, their experience is not valued. And so if they apply for a program, their CV is not comparable to other applicants and they will not be selected. They might not be able to perform well in exams and academia setting just because of the way we are evaluating people's capabilities and experience. It's just, yeah, it doesn't fit everybody. I know for me, it was not fitting me every day. I had a really random performance to exams just because of depending on the week.
The
Maybe it
moon
was moon
cycle.
cycle.
Yeah.
And so um and so there's so many things that are really like preventing more Indigenous people to be part of the science experience, the science endeavor. And we would be so much stronger with them on board because they have this perspective on the land. They have such a deep understanding on the environment. They have generations behind them that help them understand this. And right now we dismiss it and we tell them they need a piece of paper to make sure that they are reformatted in a very specific way that we as a society value. And I don't think it's a good way to value people's
Mm,
ability to contribute. Um, I was at an Indigenous science fair not so long ago, and I was looking at all these youth doing those science projects, and it was really great to see all their ideas. Um, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. It's definitely very different than a science fair like elsewhere in the country. So specific for Indigenous people. The topics are different. The way they do it is different. And it's
mm,
so beautiful. And I just hope, and that's what I was thinking to myself, that after they get maybe accepted to a program, that they go across all of the barriers and the difficulties that they will hit. Maybe they get a piece of paper that they will be able to remain themselves, to not be reformatted, but to remain who they are and do the science the way they were doing it when they were a teenager.
mm,
Just because if they are reformatted and just start to think the same way as everybody else, we lose a value. We lose an extremely good value. Uh,
mm.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean it's so something I'm understanding more and more as I look at the people who are quote unquote well educated around me, is that almost everyone has lost their curiosity about the world and they've lost their drive to continuously learn. And it's really saddening. I mean, I think people who went to excellent establishments, done the whole thing, worked phenomenal jobs. It's really sad to see that the fundamental foundation of what all of human endeavor and joy comes from, which is, that drive for curiosity has just kind of evaporated. And so I think one of the powers of simply just observing with no end in sight, there's no like outcome of your observation except you're just trying to understand it, is that curiosity will never leave. And I think it's unfortunate that whether someone actually likes what they're looking at matters. It's so sad that's such a, it's about how good you are at looking at it. It's about all these other things, but not simply like, are you having a good time doing it? Is it something that feeds your soul as you look at the stars or the mountains or whatever it is that you're observing? And so one thing I really want to ask you is, how do we cultivate that? What do we need to do? I don't even want to say how do we make someone like it, because I think people naturally
Uh,
like it. I think from the second they're born, they're fascinated by these things. So the question is more like how do you keep it, not how do you bring it?
well, we need to value it to like it's been more and more shown scientifically that we need to spend time outdoor for mental health, physical health, and many other reasons. But all of that impede our productivity, our uh, creativity. And so the more we have scientific proof, because I think that's what mostly work with most people nowadays, that we need to be spending time outdoor looking, um, and that it will help us. Um, and that after all, yes, we have been part of this environment this whole time. And no matter how much we would like to live in a city and be in perfect symbiosis with it, it's not where we're from. And even after a couple of thousands of years, our body has not been acclimated to this. Um, we need to spend time in the nature, observing and understanding it. And if we do value it and do the work and spend the time just like you do your running, maybe your 5 kilometer every morning, or you check your diet to make sure you eat healthy. Well, if you do a little bit of that every year or every week, then it'll pay off. It'll make you a better
Hmm.
researcher. Make you a better worker, and it'll make you a better person because you're going to be more ready to contribute and to help other people. And and I think that's the way to go. Yeah, just
Hmm.
value it.
So one question I have for listeners, and just to develop my own understanding of this, is I work with a few students who are really exploratory and love kind of understanding the world in all these different ways, but it often doesn't translate over to something that they can like publish or they can be like, I've done this. So what would you recommend for students who have this kind of drive so that they can still, if they wanted to at some point go to university, still have something that they can present while at the same time keeping their observations and their life open-ended?
Well, that's a good question. Um, I tend to sit my dad every time we're out there at our camp, very far away from everything. That every day I notice like a good topic for a thesis.
Hmm.
But it depends on your path. Because before you get to grad school and you do a thesis in biology or chemistry or whatever environment, um, you need a lot of things to be done before then. Um, so I kind of want to say it requires dedication, and not everybody can probably follow that kind of path because it's less certain than a typical path where you just follow. You do your first degree, and then you do a master or a PhD, and then you get your piece of paper, and then you start working on it. It's not going to be a straightforward path. It's going to be slightly windier, but better. Um, and I realized a lot of those things after I got my PhD. Guess is the wisdom.
Hmm.
Maybe I'll get more of that as time goes. But of course, when you're young, you're wondering what your life's going to be like, what you're going to be doing for a living. You're stressed out by money issues and where you are you going to have a good place to live at, and all of that impedes your freedom. Um, it didn't used to be like that. Someone would be able to feed themselves and find a place to live just because of their knowledge and their ability to read the land. Uh,
Hmm.
Now we have to fit into this setting. We need to make a living, and we need to find our place in the society and contribute. And it comes with a lot of stress. Of course, you have certainty. Someone's going to feed you. But sometimes I wonder if that is worth the price.
It's a really good, even you said a phrase that we hear all the time, but it's actually a fascinating phrase because it doesn't really make sense. The concept of make a living, you know? Like, what does that really mean? I mean, yeah, I mean, because it's living is one of those things that I'm just like, it's pretty simple when you kind of remove all the extraneous kind of noise. I mean, you got to drink water, you got to eat, and you got to feel warm enough. Like, I mean, that's there's a few more, but that's like kind of the foundation of what it takes to live. So to kind of like this concept of making a living is interesting. But
Yep.
yeah, and so, one, I guess a few questions I have for you, which is kind of separate from what we've been talking about right now. But what would you say is your favorite planet?
Ah, well, okay. I have to say the Earth, but like I have another answer, just like for the more scientific like reason. The Earth is so special. It's the most unique thing we've ever seen in the universe. Um, not even today, we know thousands of exoplanets that are orbiting other
Hmm.
stars, the sun, and we cannot for sure find situation where life can be thriving just as much as it's thriving on the Earth.
Hmm.
When I look at the solar system and all the other planets, I always tell the kids that I present the solar system to that they're all different. They have their own personality and they're all beautiful in their own way.
Hmm.
But if I'd had to pick one, I'd pick Mars, just because Mars used to be a planet with an ocean and it had a tragic transformation in the past billions of years and lost all of its water to space. But when you look at it, you see the remnants from these oceans. You see the remnants, and it's still also volcanically active. It has volcano, just like the Earth has. But it has the tallest mountain of the solar system, with one that is 25-kilometer high, just beside a canyon that is 8 times deeper than the Grand Canyon in the US. It's 16 kilometers deep. So if
Wow.
you'd be standing on the edge of it, it would be pitch dark and you wouldn't be able
Whoa.
to see the bottom of it. 16-kilometer, just beside that 25-kilometer high mountain. And that planet is about half the size of ours. It has all of these
Hmm.
striking views. And so I like Mars because of that, because it's a reminder of how fragile it is and
Hmm.
and how beautiful it could have been if it hadn't lost all of its water and if life had developed just as much as it had developed on Earth. Um, so I think we have to, yeah, to consider that when we look at Mars.
Hmm. To kind of just realize what could happen here too. I mean,
Yep.
it seems so absurd for me to think of humans just not existing on the earth anymore. I mean, it just seems such like a foreign thought. I'm like, how could that even be possible? But yeah, I mean, to think about how a planet can lose all its water, it seems that it must be possible here as well.
It is. And one of the things that I like to tell people about, I'm a physicist based of astronomy. So when we study physics, we tend to be thought that it's all about energy balance. Energy comes in, energy comes out. What is the ratio? What's left? And the Earth is the same. It's a planet. It receives energy from the sun. It irradiates energy into space on the night side. And what comes in has to come out. If to some extent it doesn't all come out and some of it is remained there, it warms.
Hmm.
And it'll warm no matter how much we would like to look at this equation. And the more humans require energy to live, with our computer, with our phone, with our chat GPT questions, with our cars, with our heating system, by producing food, all of this, not only just the amount of gas we put into the atmosphere, but our balance of energy. Well, it's going to cost us. It's going to transform the planet irremediably. And everything that we make to make our living more comfortable, that we fabricate, that is non-reversible, that is not part of the environment, it will affect the generations of the future. Because if we like to see the future in millions, billions of years from now. And we would like to see our, you know, other humans thriving the next generations to come. Every time we do something that is irreversible, we are basically shoveling it in their yard and on their planet.
Hmm.
And the ultimate ending of that, if we do not find a way to make our living on this planet perfectly in equilibrium with it, is the death of humanity. And so we need to find a cycle to build our life and building cycles that are not going to affect the future.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're just bringing back the deadline for everybody a little closer. And that's it.
There is so much to kind of, I mean, that's a whole podcast on its own. I mean, it's a fascinating question, which I think the biggest question is, does it matter whether humanity continues or not? Which I think is like a really important question that I don't think we like speak enough as from like a collective, like, is it important to us? Because if it is, then I think we would make a lot of decisions very differently. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't, then we'd continue to live like the way we are today. And
Yeah.
and so but I think it's really important to ask of, what does it look like? I mean, because you brought up a really good questions. Because I've heard, um, I quote my dad a lot in this podcast because I feel like I just have so many conversations with him. But he talks a lot about just how, global warming will affect the future. But when he talks about the future, he's talking about me and my children if I have children. And he's not, I feel like I don't ever even think about, oh, humanity 10,000 years from now, because that seems so separate from me. And that's not actually, it doesn't feel like it's connected to me. And so by talking about
It is.
yeah,
Yeah, it
exactly,
is.
but it is exactly. So what needs to happen for you to develop a deeper sense of empathy for all of humanity is a feeling of interconnectedness with everyone, not just your children. Because what then ends up happening is when you think about the future and suffering, you're only thinking 1, 2 generations ahead. And so long as your kids are fine, then you're like, that's enough for me. Which for the most part, if you've been able to create some sort of wealth for your family, most likely your kids and maybe their kids will be fine. But it's like when you think about humanity in the scale of, thousands of years, if not 10,000s, 100,000s of years, then all of a sudden these issues become a lot more pressing. They're not
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I kind of want to say it's very pressing at the rhythm at which we're going right now. Um, and again, like I'm gonna take the head of the astronomer here. The global warming could be extremely accelerated. All of those simulation that provides numbers that are published, and provided out there, these like 1.5 degree, 3 degree until this date. They are all theoretical. And it could very much be much bigger than this very quickly, just because those systems are so complex that they are, to some extent, unpredictable. And
Hmm.
even the past can tell us that when we look at global warming and interglacial periods on the planet Earth that are due to orbits changes between the planets, the Earth and the Moon, and the Sun and time. And sometimes the Earth changes 10 degrees in a few hundreds, thousands of years extremely quickly. And and this could very much happen. We don't know. We can predict it as much as we want, with our computers, with our best model. But is it the right model? It's
Hmm.
predicting something that we've never seen before. And it could very much be underestimating it. So I
Hmm.
kind of want to say we need to listen to it. We need to act upon it. We need to change our ways, and we need to do it for our children's and our children's children's. And for them, it's going to be a massive impact. We don't even have to look 10,000 years from now. It's going to be very, very important for them.
Hmm. Now, it all ties back to the interconnectedness because you can't feel the pain, perhaps. I mean, even saying this seems kind of, I don't know what the right word is, corny, but it's because I haven't developed the sensitivity to actually understand the pain that perhaps even the earth is feeling. And even by saying something like that, I'm like, oh, it sounds kind of like, over my head, but it's like it's something that takes time and the sensitivity to actually feel that connectedness. It sounds
Yeah,
silly when you just say it, but it's a real thing.
yeah. And I read sometimes people that come up with solution like, oh, but we have such good science. Maybe we could cool the earth with some project, whatever. And I'm like, no, this is not the solution. The
Hmm.
system is so complex. We're just going to throw another variable in it if we're trying to cool it by X and Y mechanism. Um, we had a good system that was working well. We know it's working well when it's doing it the way it's supposed to be naturally after those thousands of years of evolution. We need to get it where it is comfortable, where it's not continuously eating and spiraling up. So, as a scientist and as a person, that's how I feel about this. And I just hope that more people would. And one day when I did like a quick back of the envelope calculation on how many trees should we be planting, to try to counterbalance. And it was like 30,000 tree per person or something like that. If
What?
plant trees like right now. And I'm probably very off by a lot of an order of magnitude, but even though if I would, let's imagine like that all human beings that are capable to plant trees are planting trees tomorrow, they'd have to plant maybe 60,000. It's like half of them are
Wow.
able. Can you imagine how long it would take?
No. I've never
And
planted a tree. I would like to.
yeah, they would have to start. But there are so many other ways that we can help with. Um, and planting trees is just probably like the poster child of all this. But it shows the amount of work that needs to be done per person.
Hmm. I think education is a huge one. I
Yes.
mean, um, yeah. I mean, I have one last kind of hot take question for you, which is, do you think that there is other, I don't know if the right word is conscious, but conscious life out there?
Oh, yes, I think there is. But I think we will never meet them. That's the thing.
Ever?
Yeah, that's how I think.
Why?
The universe is too big, and the probability to have the right conditions is too small. And so if they are out there, they're out of reach. That's what I believe. But I think they are out there. There's probably
Hmm.
plenty actually in
That
another
would be
galaxy, other
fascinating.
corner of the galaxy. And unfortunately, the speed of light is what it is, and the space is very, very vast.
Hmm.
So we just have to believe that they are there. And maybe we'll be able to observe some signs of them on their planet from a big, big, big telescope. But I think that's the best hope we can have. And I think it'll be enough for most people just to know that they're out there, maybe with
Yeah.
observing.
Well, if you're able to see them, in theory, you could communicate with them, right?
Yes, but let's say you observe them in one of the planets that is, uh, let's say at 1/10 of the size of our galaxy away. So that's about 10,000 light years away. Uh,
Wow.
so you'd send the communication, they would receive it in 10,000 years, and then they might prepare an answer and send it back to you, and you'd get it 20,000 years later.
Oh, that's
Make
difficult.
it a very, very entertaining conversation.
I'm reading this book called Three Body Problem. Have you read it by any chance? I have been loving
Oh, yeah, I
it, but
haven't read
it's,
it, but I just seen the first series on Netflix about
yeah,
this.
we're talking about that. It's been making me think a lot about just physics and Earth and our place in kind of the larger
Yeah.
picture. But thank you so much for this conversation. I really am glad I got to start my week with this and just the centering and trying to keep that importance of interconnectedness and feeling that I'm not higher than nature or somehow humans haven't like defeated nature, but it's something that you should be one with, not one
Yes.
against, and I think that's a really important perspective shift for me that I need to really feel before I can make that leap into understanding I'm one with nature, not one above nature.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, definitely. Nature is so beautiful and complex. And the more you understand it, the more you understand you have no control over it.
Mm, wow. So yeah, thank you for your time. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.